Hello, this is Brian Long. Everyone can benefit from being a little more efficient in what they spend time doing on a day-to-day basis. By the time this session is over, it's my goal that everyone will have picked up some little tip, and hopefully a whole bundle of tips, to make their use of the Delphi or C++ Builder IDE just a bit more efficient. I've been working with Delphi and C++ Builder as a freelance consultant, developer, troubleshooter, trainer, writer and mentor ever since the pre-release days of each of these products, often working with customers to improve their knowledge of Delphi and C++ Builder by introducing them to techniques and features they may be unfamiliar with. Being someone who finds the keyboard a more efficient means of achieving many goals on a computer, I made a point of finding out keystroke shortcut equivalents for many features that are available through menus and mouse usage, and additionally keystrokes for features that seem to be unique to keyboard invocation. So without further ado, let's press on with this session and take a tour of my favourite shortcuts and lesser known features of the Rad Studio IDE. Many of these features date back years to the early versions of Delphi, and some of them have only been introduced in the more recent versions. To find out if your favourite version supports any of these features, your best bet is to try them out. Here we are in the Rad Studio IDE. We have some Delphi source code here. We also have some C++ source code here for some comparison, as most of the features work equally between the two languages, which is terrific. The first set of features we'll look at were introduced a long time ago, back in the days of Delphi 3, a whopping 15 years ago. These features were added in under the umbrella term of Code Insight, and they represent a number of features which we kind of take completely for granted now, but before Delphi 3 they simply weren't there. So let's have a look in a subroutine here. The sort of thing that Code Insight include is this pop-up window, the code completion window, which, as you know, typically pops up after you type in an expression and a dot in Delphi to indicate that you want some members, or alternatively an arrow sign in C++. And it does pop up automatically when you press the symbol, but sometimes it's nice to be able to pop the window up manually, for example, like that, and the keystroke for that is Control Space. Control Space brings up the Code Insight window. One or two things about the Code Insight window: it's not necessarily that well known that it is resizable, but it is. It's also sortable. By default, all the items that pop up in the code completion window are sorted by scope, uses clause, unit scope. You can right click on it and choose to alphabetize everything in the list as well. Code Insight is one of them. Another one that is quite common is this little tooltip that shows you the parameter lists of all of the overloads of the method whose parameter list you just opened. This is called the code parameters window, and it pops up again automatically, but sometimes it's nice to be able to go back to a parameter list and invoke the code parameters window manually, which you can do using Control Shift Space. Up it pops. Of course, the nice thing about code parameters is that the parameter that you're on is emboldened, so you know which one you need to be paying attention to. Another rather helpful addition with Code Insight is the list of code templates. These ones are less well used than code parameters and code completion, simply because they don't pop up automatically and the keystroke is completely non-intuitive. The keystroke is Control J. With Control J you get a list of templates. Again, this is a resizable window. It's a list of templates which is possibly too large for the convenience that the feature offers. Maybe it would be easier to type in the first couple of letters of what you're looking for. So maybe you're looking for a template for a for loop. Put in the first couple of characters, press Control J, you get just the for loops, which is quite handy. There's a reverse for loop, and similarly, if we were looking for a class, we could ask for a class declaration in that sort of manner. So these code templates can be very handy. Back in Delphi 2006, Delphi's code templates had a bit of a transformation into live templates, which were a little bit more dynamic and often pop up automatically. So for example, going back to the for loop again, if we do type in for, we automatically get a template in place where tab does take us from one element to another. We can define either relatively simple code templates, or indeed these dynamic live templates reasonably straightforwardly. The syntax for a live template is a little unwieldy, but there is documentation out there on the net to enable you to build them. In fact, perhaps let's have a quick look at building a simple template to make it easier to type in calls to message dialog, which is, let's be fair, a fairly regularly called function. What we need is a new code template. We can either pick one from File, New, Other, or alternatively on the code palette, the tool palette down here, we can choose a code template. And let's save it in a minute. What we've got here is an XML file with a load of bits that we need to fill in. So firstly, we need to give the code template a name. We need to specify whether it's only manually invocable or whether it can be automatically invoked. We need to give it a description. And maybe specify an author. And then the most important part, of course, is the actual code that's going to be inserted when the code template is made use of. So I'll just put in the basic call to message dialog, or an example call. So that's a basic sample call. If we use this code template to insert that call, we then need to go back and change anything that needed changing, such as the message type, the buttons, and so on. To make it a bit more dynamic and easier to update once it's been inserted, we can make it a live template. And to do that, we need to insert a number of substitution points. And the substitution points look like this. Each one's got a name, and also each one has some text and a hint, and the three things that are likely to need updating will need 3 of these substitution points. So one of them will be called message, one of them will be called message type, one of them will be called message buttons. The default text for message will be blah blah. The default text for message type will be information, empty information, and the default text for message buttons will be MBOK. We can put in a little hint to the user. And then what we need to do is actually reference these substitution points in the live template. To do so, we also need to specify that the language is Delphi. To do so, we need to mention that the delimiter being used is a pipe sign, and then we can put in pairs of pipe signs at the places that we want these substitution points, and then we can copy the names of the substitution points in between the pipe signs. I'm using control drag to copy a highlighted block of text. Just dragging text moves it. Control drag copies it. It's the same in Microsoft Word. What else do we need to do? Yeah, at the end, once all the substitution points have been dealt with, we need to indicate where to leave the cursor at the end of the job. And that's done like that. So let's save this template. By default, code templates are stored in the user profile Rad Studio code templates folder. Okay, so that's saved the template away, and hopefully that means if we go back to the code, type in MSG, the first few letters of my code template's name, which was MSG-DLG, press Ctrl J, it gives us a list of 1 template starting with that. If we press Enter, it allows us to type in that sort of thing. And when you press Tab the final time, that's where the live template ends. The fact that it's automatically invocable means that if we type in the name of the template and press space or tab, it will automatically invoke the code template because it recognises the name. So code templates or live templates, very handy. Live templates as they have been since Delphi 2006. Okay. Just before moving on, I guess we should make another code template. And pretty much replicate what we had there, but just prove that it also works with C++ in exactly the same way. So we'll just change that, change the language to C, and then change the code to be C++-esque. So that is necessary. And that, so I think that then makes it valid C++. So let's close and save that, nip over to the C++ code that I've got over here, and go to a gap here, MSG, Control-J. Yeah, so it works exactly the same, there's no difference whatsoever. Other aspects of Code Insight that have been added in include Tooltip Help Insight. This is where we pause our mouse over a symbol and we get a rich text pop-up telling us the type and the unit that the type comes from. Let's try one that's got a bit more information. Button one click. It tells us the type, it tells us the source file, it tells us the location in the source file, it gives us information about parameters. It's quite rich information. We can enrich it further if we wish, by using XML comments, which is, to be honest, it's a bit tedious to do manually. So it's therefore very handy that recent versions of RAD Studio have come with a light version of DevJet's Documentation Insight product. Documentation Insight is available on the Tools menu. If we choose Show Documentation, it brings us up a little window, which perhaps we'll just dock here, and it allows us to put in a summary for the symbol that was under the cursor. Oh, this, okay. I must admit, I did think that we're on button one click. Let's try that again. Okay, so we type in the various bits and it puts in the appropriate XML comment syntax for us. Now the point of this is that when we then hover our mouse over a symbol, we do get this richer information. So here we do have the summary, we have the description of the parameter and the remark at the end. Now Tooltip Help Insight appears when you pause your mouse over a symbol. In addition, I think we'll find in Code Completions pop-up, when you select an item that also has XML comment syntax, you'll find that to the right of the selected item, the same rich window pops up, so that's quite handy. In addition, you can have this window pop up of your own volition if you're just moving around with the keyboard. Control-Shift-H will give you the Tooltip Help Insight for the symbol under the cursor. Now, Tooltip Help Insight, very, very useful, but it has actually taken over from what the original pop-up tooltip functionality was inside of Code Insight prior to Delphi 8, I should imagine. The original one was called Tooltip Symbol Insight, and it's still there, but it's only there if you disable Tooltip Help Insight. So to control the Code Insight options, we can go into the Tools Options dialog and locate the Code Insight page of options, where we could control and customize how code completion works, the code parameters window. We can turn off Tooltip Help Insight, leaving Tooltip Symbol Insight on. And now when we pause our mouse over a symbol, we just get the old school simple tooltip, which tells us that it's a procedure type symbol. It tells us the signature, and it tells us the source file and the line number of the definition. So we have an option. We can either have the big rich window or a tiny little tooltip. It's up to our discretion. Another feature in Code Insight is Error Insight. You'll doubtless have seen the feature. When you type in something that the compiler is not happy about, it puts a little red squiggle under it, and assuming the structure window is available, it then, in addition to the normal hierarchical view of the contents of the current source file, we also get a list of errors that the compiler has found, or that the compiler thinks it's found. A big bugbear of mine over the past few versions, well, I'm not sure how many, but several versions of Delphi, is that the Error Insight window is somewhat delicate in its integrity. On many an occasion you will see errors which simply don't exist, and no matter what you do to try and tell the compiler that you fixed the problems or that the problem isn't there, the problems persist, and you have to shut Delphi and restart it to clear this cache of ghost errors. To be honest, this does frustrate me, so my personal recommendation is to go back into the Code Insight options, turn Error Insight off. That problem has disappeared. Maybe if Error Insight ever becomes reliable in terms of matching the compiler's behaviour, then I'll be happy to turn it back on, but until then it's gone. What, however, I do rely upon and do find very useful and practical is code browsing. Code browsing is all about being taken to the definition or declaration of a symbol. So, for example, input query, if I want to find out what that's defined or implemented, I can right click and choose Find Declaration, be taken to its implementation in the Delphi VCL source. Similarly, in a C++ file, if I want to find out where message DLG is declared, I can right click, choose Find Declaration, and be taken to the relevant declaration in one of the VCL header files. That's a context menu. The more widely known shortcut for doing this type of finding this type of location of declaration is done by holding the control key down and then waving your mouse around in the source file. Anything that in theory has a declaration that you can be taken to will be turned into a hyperlink. If you click on the hyperlink, you'll be taken to that symbol. So if I hold down the control key and click on Format, I'll be taken to the implementation of format. Same thing in C++, if I hold down the control key, click on try strutter int, I'll be taken to the declaration for it. The idea is, because it turns into a hyperlink and you click the link, it's a bit like web browsing, so they call it code browsing. And very much like a web browser, we have a code browsing history. This is affected by these buttons here, so we can go backwards and forwards through the code browsing history, and we can also do that using Alt left arrow and Alt right arrow. Now, control and a click is not exactly a keystroke shortcut, it's a combination of key and a mouse. There is, however, an additional shortcut that is keystroke only. So let's go back to, well, let's close down a few of these. Tidy things up a bit. So the keystroke in question is Alt up arrow. So if you hold down the Alt key and press the up cursor key, that will do exactly the same job with keyboard alone. Now, that's pretty much the end of the original Code Insight set of features. It was a handsome set of features, I'll certainly attest to that. However, it's certainly not the end of the source code navigation keystroke, so let's move on and see some more. Okay, let's just tidy up a little bit more. Back to some my simple Delphi file. Okay, method hopping. This was introduced a few versions back, and it's quite neat. If you want to, it's more useful in a larger source file, but we'll just work with this this smaller one, and then perhaps we'll open up a VCL source file to just check that it works there as well. The idea is we can move between the methods by holding down Control and Alt and doing various things. Control Alt Home takes you to the first subroutine or method. You'll notice there are no more above this message function. Control Alt End, excuse me. Control Alt End takes you to the last one. Control Alt Up goes upwards. Control Alt Down goes downwards. And Control Alt and scrolly mouse wheel, you may be able to hear my mouse wheel scrolling, allows me to similarly scroll through the methods. The same thing works in C++. Let's see. Let's open up a given class. Here's one. This will do. This has got some methods. And use the mouse wheel, or indeed Control Alt down arrow, and you'll see that it bounces down from method to method to method to method all the way through a source file. However, maybe you're specifically interested in a particular class, in which case you can press Control QL and that does a class lock. And so what that means is when you're scrolling down, it will keep scrolling down until it gets to the last method of that class. Oh, there it is. And then won't scroll down any further. So I've got to the last method of tCustomForm and it hasn't scrolled down into tForm. However, if I press Control QL again, that will toggle the class lock back off, and then Control Alt down arrow will scroll through tForm, tCustom, DocWindow, tScreen, and so on and so on. So method hopping, quite a nice keystroke set. Method hopping works in Delphi and C++ Builder. In earlier versions of Delphi, before method hopping came along, there was already a navigation keystroke called module navigation. This is a very nice keystroke which allows you to jump between the implementation and the declaration of a given subroutine or method. So, for example, in this VCL source file that I'm in now, I'm in the implementation of tscreen.getMonitor. If I hold down Control and Shift and press either up or down arrow, that will take me to the declaration of getMonitor. And pressing either up or down arrow again will take me back to the implementation. And obviously the same thing works with my own code, be it a global subroutine or indeed a method. This is a Delphi only thing, this one doesn't work in C++ Builder. Now, going away from navigation onto more general things to do with source code manipulation, indenting and outdenting. It used to be quite difficult to do the indenting and outdenting because you did have to remember a specific keystroke. Nowadays, Tab and Shift Tab do work. However, in earlier versions of Delphi, you had to remember either Control Shift I and Control Shift U, or Control KI and Control KU. And then there was also the additional problem of taking up on somebody else's code which was laid out in a less than personally favourable manner. From, was it Delphi XE or was it Delphi XE2? Over the recent couple of versions we have had introduced into the product a source code formatter, a pretty printer, which is very customisable. We can find the pretty printer on the edit menu, edit format source, and as you can see, Control D is what we're looking at. So if we press Control D, well, the first time we'll get a confirmation dialog, and indeed we'll subsequently always get a confirmation dialog unless we tell it not to bother. So that allows it to reformat the source, and the same thing actually applies with C++. So if we just unformat this source here, press Control D, that will reformat it. If we want, we can go into the Tools Options dialog, go and find the formatter, and we have C++ and Delphi options to customize exactly how the source gets relayed out, and it's very customizable with various profiles that you can set up. Okay, let's just tidy this up a little bit again. Now, back in the Delphi source file, sometimes it's useful to be able to just jump straight to a given line that you're hunting down. In some text editors it's Control-G, but not in the Rad Studio text editor. There it is Alt-G. So Alt-G brings up the go-to line number box. Maybe we want to jump to line 75. Sometimes it'd be useful to be able to go back to a place that we were editing text in. This is where bookmarks come in. We can drop up to 10 bookmarks in each source file in the IDE. We can do it using the context menu. Let's say, for example, we wanted to toggle bookmark 1 on here and go down here and then jump back to bookmark 1. We can do it with the context menu, that's fair enough. We can also do it using keystrokes. So to drop a bookmark, maybe drop bookmark number 2, we can do Control Shift 2, and in order to go back to bookmark number 2, we can do Control 2. This works very nicely, Control Shift number and then Control number. Works quite nicely, except for, let's see, Control Shift 9 works, Control 9 works. The one that doesn't work is Control Shift 0. And for that we need to revert back to the much older classic keystrokes. So the other keystrokes for dealing with bookmarks are Control K and a number, so Control K6, and in order to go to it, Control Q and a number, 6. And if we do Control K0, that does drop bookmark 0, and hopefully Control Q 0 also goes back to it. Bookmarks are great. It used to be the case that bookmarks were not saved in the desktop file, so every time you close the project, even if you were saving the desktop file, you would lose all of your bookmarks. For those older versions of Delphi, use a breakpoint. Drop breakpoints over the place, disable the breakpoints, and use the breakpoints window as a means for bouncing to the target breakpoint to take you back to a place in the source code. However, in more recent versions, Delphi now does store the bookmarks in the desktop, and let's just prove that by closing this project and then reopening it again, and yeah, all of our bookmarks are now restored. A delightful change. If we're working with COM or indeed other systems which require unique numbers, it's often the case that GUIDs or GUIDs are employed. The keystroke in the Delphi editor for adding a GUID is Control-Shift-G, and it adds it in excuse me, it adds it in with the braces, the apostrophes and the square brackets. That was a bit of a random one. Something that does come in very handy. Sometimes you want to rename a variable. You can obviously select a block of text and then bring up the search and replace box and say I want to change numstr to be numstring only in the selected text. That's fair enough. But that will also change occurrences of that string in comments and inside strings, and sometimes it will be overzealous in its replacing. A very nice feature was added somewhere around about Delphi 2006, and it's called Sync Edit. You may notice whenever you highlight a block of text that there's this little icon that appears with a picture of, well, if you took a quick look at it, it might look like a pair of binoculars, but in fact it's a pair of pencils stuck together with little strips of wood, one of those multiple writing devices that you may have played with as a kid. The idea with Sync Edit, which we can invoke by pressing it, or as you can see from the tooltip by pressing Control-Shift-J, is that as soon as we invoke it, it will identify all the identifiers which have more than one instance, and so therefore can be multiply simultaneously edited. So numstr and num and msg would appear to be the only identifiers in this block which have multiple occurrences. So if I want to change numstr to be numstring, or maybe number string, press tab to move to the next identifier, and you can see that this, just editing one of the instances changes all of them en masse. The alternative is to use the refactoring engine to modify a symbol. So for example, maybe I want to change number string, so what I can do is choose refactor, rename variable. Control-Shift-E is the shortcut for that. So if we use Control-Shift-E, we could say number string new name. It will list out all the occurrences of number string, and then we can apply the refactoring and it will change number string to be number string new name in all occurrences there. So one or the other is great. Sync Edit is just, it just looks nice though, and it feels lovely. A related feature in the refactoring engine which can be quite valuable at times is the references locator. We can press Control-Shift-Enter on a symbol and it will give us a list of all the references to that symbol that it can find in the compiled code. In this case there are 4 references to that symbol. Same thing works in C++. How many references are there to numstr? Oops, that was Control-Shift-E. Control-Shift-Enter. Finding symbol references, and it says, yep, I've got 1, 2, 3 of them, which is probably about fair enough. 1, 2, 3 of them. Some other things which I've found valuable, well, it's less valuable in Windows 8, where by default caps lock makes a noise when you turn it on and off. That is one of the accessibility settings that you could optionally turn on in earlier versions of Windows, but is on by default in Windows 8. However, disregarding that, not being a touch typist myself, I often have fallen foul of typing lots of text with caps lock on. And the point is, because I'm not a touch typist, I'm not looking at the screen, I can type in several lines of it, and then when I look up, I frown and I am sad, because I have lots of text to replace with the inverted case. However, all is not lost in the Delphi IDE, making sure we turn caps lock back to the right setting. If you highlight the block of code, my favourite keystroke, which is actually not in the list of keystrokes that are in the online help, is Control OU, which inverts the case of the marked block of text. Actually, let's put that back. Another couple of keystrokes which are handy. Control T deletes the word to the right of the cursor, and Control backspace deletes the word to the left of the cursor. Additionally, Control Y deletes the current line. Other ones which were noteworthy, Control / will toggle between commenting and uncommenting a block. If you want to open up a unit whose name is under the cursor, that's Control Enter. And Control F4 closes the current file. One that's probably not very useful at all, but I'll just mention it for some sort of vague level of completeness. Control OO will insert all of the compiler directives at the top of the unit, making sure that they will take precedence over any further changes in the project options. So that ends up looking like this. You've got all the short version of most of the compiler directives at the top, and then you've got all the warnings listed out below. As I say, probably not that useful, but maybe of vague interest. Control Y, Control Y, Control Y. If you have a lot of source files open in the editor, using this little arrow here gives you a list of them, but if you're stuck with your keyboard, Control Alt F12 gives you the same functionality. If you want to search for something in the environment, well, you probably know that in recent versions the search boxes, the normal search, Control F, is no longer a modal box, but a non-modal search has always existed, which is the incremental search. So maybe I want to search for number or something along those lines. Control E invokes incremental search, NUMBER. So you can see that it's a progressive search, and can often be a bit more efficient than trying to search for an exact string, which could be quite a long one that you need to type in. If you want to get access to the tool palette, well, obviously you can use the equivalent of the tool palette, file, new, other, gives you much the same functionality. But if you do want to access the tool palette and you don't want to stretch for your mouse, Control Alt P will take you to the tool palette, make it focused, and specifically allow you to type into the search box. So maybe I want to make another code template. So having pressed Control Alt P, I can just type in code, press enter, I've got another code template set up. Obviously this works just as well from the form designer. So let's get rid of these, give ourselves a bit more. The form designer, Control Alt P, maybe I want an edit box. Actually, talking of the tool palette, you may of course remember the component palette, favoured by many until it was removed some versions back. If you do want the component palette, recent versions of Delphi, I think XE2 onwards, have introduced it back again, so we can add it on, and that again has got a searching facility. However, the best searching facility of all is called IDE Insight. Control dot brings up the dialog, and it allows me to search across pretty much everything. The tool palette, the component palette, the various options dialog. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, I want to control the optimization setting of the compiler. So if I just start typing in optimization, there I am taken to the relevant setting, and if I press OK, it takes me to the optimization setting in the project options dialog. So Control dot is IDE Insight, is great. Now, how about the history tab, which many people completely ignore? The history tab shows various saved versions of your file up to a certain amount controlled in the options dialog. These are stored in a hidden history subfolder, and they're obviously there for good version control, but we can do difference comparisons. So maybe I want to check what the differences are between the current file and the file that was saved 4 saves ago. I can check the differences looking at this difference viewer, but I'm not sure that I get on with it that well. With the latest version of Delphi, it does come equipped with a light version of Beyond Compare, so perhaps I can launch the 2 files in Beyond Compare and see, which I'm quite familiar with because I use Beyond Compare normally, and see the differences in a more understandable manner. Can be handy. Okay. Let's now see if we can find a good use for keystroke macro recording. Let's say that I'm writing some low-level Windows code and I want to log some information about Windows messages that come in. And in order to do that, what I want to do is to turn a message constant into a message string. So what I'm going to do is have a great big case statement, which is something like case message of, and then, well, I need some message constants, so let's find out where they live. They're in here. Control Enter to open that file. Right. So here's a bunch of them. Let's just take a handful. That'll do for now. That'll do for now. What I'm going to do is make use of the keystroke macro record to change one of these cases into the kind of statement or the kind of case expression that I want, and I'm going to use the macro playback to then apply the same changes to all the other lines. So what do I need to do? For each of these messages I need to say something like, let's see, Control-Shift-R to go into keystroke macro recording mode, and we're going to go to the beginning of the line, press Control-Y because we don't need the compiler directive, then we're going to say Control-Right. I need to get this into the clipboard, Control-KT to highlight the current word, Control-C to clipboard copy, then right arrow, left arrow, result is assigned, format message is Control-V. Oh, actually, it wasn't. Format's not needed, is it? So in fact, let's just Shift End, delete, Control Left, left. Get rid of that lot. Down to the next line, press Home. All of those keystrokes should apply to each pair of lines that I've got now. So I need to end the keystroke macro, Control-Shift-R, and now I'm going to play it back. Control-Shift-P, P, 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 P. Okay, so that's the sort of case that keystroke macro record and playback comes in very useful for, where a certain number of changes can be thought up to apply to a number of similar lines to get the sort of effect that you need to make. It's basically allowing a computer to do repetitive tasks which are very tedious for the person to do. It's just a case of working out exactly what those tasks are. So many features, so little time. Just a quick thing on the form designer. Let's put a panel on here and pop these 2 things into the panel. Right, so if we want to move something not by one grid unit, which is the normal thing, Control, cursor keys, move it, Shift, cursor keys, resize it. If you want to lasso a bunch of things on a container, hold down the Control key, Escape will select the currently selected item's parent. On the Object Inspector, Control down arrow brings down the component list, Tab bounces you between the 2 columns, and plenty of other shortcuts. Check the online help, see if there's any other good ones that I've missed out on. Okay, so I think that's about all I've got time for there. Okay, so that was a fairly rapid fire run through of a whole bunch of productivity features, typically keystroke shortcuts. I hope that you've gained some useful tips out of there and will help you make use of the Delphi and C++ Builder IDEs more efficiently. If you've got any questions, obviously I hope you posted them on, and I can try and answer some of them now. Otherwise, send me an email, and also send me a mail if I can be of any service to your project. Thank you.
You've done a great job of handling a bunch of questions in advance. Let's just go through a few of them. There was a question about Code Insight's speed of popping up as you're typing, and I think you had offered some advice on how Code Insight works.
Yeah, there was a comment that it was potentially coming up quite slow, particularly with very large projects. And of course, the way Code Insight works is it relies upon background threads running compilations to get all the same information that the compiler would do during a regular compilation, such that it can provide the relevant information. And of course, if you've got a very large project, then these background compilations are going to be quite cumbersome and quite tardy. So I guess you've got to weigh up the options of the benefit of Code Insight against the amount of time it's going to take for these background compilations to provide the information that Code Insight offers. Obviously, there are other potential causes to these sorts of slowdowns. Third-party add-ins can add a bit of tardiness to the situation as well. But really, the primary issue is the background compilation. And if it's too much of a problem, well, I guess turning it off or modularizing the project further such that each of the constituent parts of the project aren't so huge.
Control-Shift-J is not working in my IDE German language.
Oh, that one later came back as it is working, and that got confirmed by somebody else.
Can you confirm that find references is not just doing a text search?
Okay, so find references, from when it was introduced out of the refactoring engine, and the refactoring engine was built with it wasn't just built as a text grab thing, it was built with intelligence, following the trails of the unit references and doing essentially a similar sort of job to collate the information that it required to work as the compiler did. So consequently, we should be able to say with a pretty good degree of emphasis that it won't just be doing a text search, and it should be doing the sensible thing when it comes to same named identifiers in different contexts.
Sure, a lot of great keyboard shortcuts. Yeah, there are a lot. And Brian, I think you mentioned send people to DocWiki or the online help to get a lot of those shortcuts. Maybe there's some that aren't in there. Let's see.
Yeah, the DocWiki is lacking some of them, which is why sometimes it's good to have a run through some of the good options which have dropped out. It does have a lot. It does have most of them in there. But for example, my favourite one, which is the translate the uppercase to lower, well, switch the case of the typed in block, doesn't seem to be in there, which is odd because it used to be back in the days of the sort of Delphi 7 and earlier help files. But yeah, most of them are there.
There's a Greg asks, is there a way to highlight a certain section of commented lines and then make them wrap around so that none of the lines extend past the right margin? I'm not aware of anything like that.
No, I'm also not aware of anything like that, no, alas. Other than possibly another keystroke macro. If you have just one keystroke macro handy, then you could do some sort of half sensible effort, but it would probably break words. You could just right arrow 70 times from the left-hand margin and press enter. That would kind of do it, but it would break words. So I don't think there's a sensible way of doing it, no.
Larry was asking, is there a way to jump to the implementation interface uses clause without G-experts? I don't know if any way that way. I mean, you can move between declaration and implementation of a method, for example, but I don't know about moving to the uses clause other than searching for uses.
There are keystrokes for region collapsing and expanding, and one of the keystrokes, which admittedly I don't actually have off the top of my head, is one for collapsing the interface and implementation section and then expanding again. I'm not sure where the cursor will be left when you do that. Bearing in mind the uses clause is pretty much at the top of those sections, that might be worth looking at.
Yeah, I'd just do a find for uses.
Well, yeah, Control Home and Control E for incremental search.
Is there a way to split the code window into two panes that function independently on the same code? And
Well, it's not quite the same as the usual split pane effect, but you can open up additional editors with the same files in. I'm struggling to remember. Oh yeah, on the context menu for the editor, you can choose new edit window. I'm pretty sure you can have the same file opened in both, but it's not a split pane thing as you would see in Word or Visual Studio or anything like that. So not quite.
is there a keyboard shortcut to get to the end related with the begin? I know if you highlight any block structure and if you point to the start of it, it'll highlight the end or the closing, whatever it is, parentheses or so on. Is there any shortcuts that you remember?
The only shortcut is pretty much redundant now. There used to be a shortcut just for the parentheses, but not for beginning. The answer to the question is no. There is a shortcut for the parentheses, which is Alt left square bracket and Alt right square bracket, but that was quite handy when you needed to see which was the matching upper bracket. But these days, when you put your cursor next to a bracket, the other one's highlighted anyway, so it's kind of pointless. But no, that's exactly the sort of thing that some of the common add-ins will give you, begin-end toggling.
Let's see, it'd be great to be able to highlight a word or block of text and immediately hit F3 to find the next occurrence. Yeah, I don't know a way other than highlight the block, copy and paste it into the search and do incremental search from there. But
yeah, so Control KT to highlight the word, Control C, Control F, Control V, F3.
Yeah.
It's not really a shortcut, is it?
Yeah.
It's like something a paragraph.
And then record it and do something, yeah. Is there a mechanism to collapse if-then code? I mean, you can collapse in the editor. There's if you see the plus sign in the gutter, you can expand and collapse all sorts of different block structures. I'm not sure about if-then and C++. But
C++. Well, certainly in Delphi, you can define custom regions and then collapse those. I assume you could do that in C++. I haven't tried.
Yeah, it's still the code editor. I'll have to try that too in C++. Yeah.
Well, so it's a pragma, isn't it, for custom regions?
Brian, do you have all of these excellent tips in a write-up or blog?
Funnily enough, yeah. A couple of months ago on my blog, I did post up pretty much this exact set of, well, actually, I think it was a slightly larger list, in a tabular form with a few notes and a couple of links to pages in the help file that discuss them a bit further. So, yeah, I'll see if I can dig up that whilst we're talking and post the link in, or I'll post it up shortly thereafter.
Yep, and so blog.blong.com. That's hard for me to say. I don't know why, but it is. Okay, I'm just scrolling down here. We've got a couple more minutes before the product address. Can we disable the automatic removing of empty event handlers when saving a unit? I don't know about an automatic way. What I do is put / any event handler just so that it's always there.
Yep, me too.
But that's what I do. I just put / whenever I double click on an event handler while I'm thinking about what it is I want to type ultimately. And once you have the / just, a single line comment, then the event handler will stay there when you save.
Yeah.
Or compile, build, whatever. Let's see, I know I can use files, use unit to add a unit to the uses clause, but the unit has to belong to the project. I'd love to be able to easily add math or the units to my uses clause without navigating there. Do you know of any other way to add a unit into a uses clause besides going there and typing it? I don't remember.
Alt F11 if it's a part of the project.
If it's in the project, right?
Yeah, but not other than that.
Let's see, you missed a couple of my favorite keystrokes. Control-O-C to turn on column blocking, and then use shift arrows to highlight blocks, and Control-OK. Yeah,
that's a good one. You can also do the same thing for highlighting a columnar block of text just by holding the Alt key and dragging a rectangle out, which is what I tend to do. It does use the mouse, but it seems to be just as quick as waiting for the keyboard auto repeat to allow the cursor keys to drag out a rectangle. But yeah, Control-O-C, and there was also other ones. Control-O-L did line marking, and there was another one for Control-O-I for inclusive under the cursor marking, and then Control-OK for going back to regular selection marking. So yeah, they're good ones. I did have to chop a whole bunch out. What with the 35 to 40 minute threshold, but those were in the cutoff list, unfortunately.
And a few other suggestions in the Q&A log for other Control-Tab, Control-Shift-Tab to move between the tabs showing different units and such. Yeah. Brian, thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.